the way Colts fans felt on Sunday when they spent their hard-earned money to go watch the home team host the Browns. Not to mention anyone that might have had some of their hard-earned money on the money line. I don't know whether or not the Browns probably didn't cover. They only won by 1, and it wasn't a half-point spread. So if you had the Colts in the spread, you were still happy. If you had the Colts on the money line, you were not happy because the Colts didn't win the game. Now, Jim Irsay, owner of the Colts, not happy. And he tucked this one into a longer tweet that you had to click to see it all. The main message in his tweet related to the surgery that was performed on starting quarterback Anthony Richardson's shoulder. He's out for the year. He's had successful surgery. It's always successful until it isn't. They repaired what was expected. Anthony's doing well, and thanks to everyone for the support. There's no date for his return. We know he's not going to be back this year. But then, boom, burying the lead, Jim Irsay did. The NFL admits and understands that they did not make their correct calls at the end of Sunday's Colts-Browns game. I believe we need to institute instant replay for all calls, including penalties in the last 2 minutes of all games. A twist on what Bill Belichick has been arguing for years, Charean, that coaches should be able to challenge anything. If there's clear and obvious visual evidence that a ruling on the field is incorrect, the coach should be able to throw the red flag and challenge anything he wants. Irsay's point, final 2 minutes of the game, anything is fair game. Any inaccurate application of the rules subject to challenge. And what he's referring to here, 2 moments. One, illegal contact that wiped out what would have been a Browns fumble, Colts recovery, game over, and gave Cleveland first and goal on the 8. And then more importantly, and here's the first one, 3rd and 4, ball's out, recovered by the Colts, but oh wait, flag on the play, illegal contact, here's the contact. I had someone from another team say, there's a lot worse than that never gets called, especially late in the game where it's let them play. Now, here's 1st and goal from the 8. That's ruled pass interference. The ball almost lands in the stands. In fact, on one hop, it's in the stands. It's called pass interference, 1st and goal for the Browns. And it was clearly uncatchable. As someone said on the PFT text thread, Dwight Clark on a ladder couldn't have caught that one. So according to Irsay, and I think it's important to look at exactly what he said, they did not make the correct calls with an S. Calls. He doesn't specify, but I assume it's those two. Hey, we screwed those two up. I still don't know about the first one. I definitely know about the second one. And there's also a chance the messenger's off a little bit because let's be real here. The messenger's off a little bit, generally. But Charean, what do you think about this idea, this proposal, this notion of making everything subject to replay review in the final 2 minutes of the game? Anything, everything that there's clear and obvious evidence to support the ruling on the field was wrong.
Games could get really long and we could get bogged down in the final 2 minutes, but I kind of like it because the final 2 minutes of the half and the game are so important to the outcome of games, especially the final 2 minutes of the game. My concern is how many times do they get things wrong, because there you would have had it obviously twice. You had things that were overturned. Then I guess the game would have ended, so you wouldn't have had the second one. But I don't know. They make a number of mistakes. Obviously, there's human error in this game. And if there's multiple times you're stopping the game, then we're going to have 10-second runoffs. We got to reset the clock. I just think it could get bogged down a little bit. But I like the idea because you want it to be right. And those two plays obviously had a huge bearing on the outcome. The Colts would have won that game if not for the illegal contact call, because they had the ball on the fumble. And then let's say they rule that's right, we're not going to overturn that one. Okay, you go to the next one. Would they have gotten in? Well, we don't know. We'll never know whether they would have gotten in or not. But people watching in a bar, people watching at home on TV, the old rule of 99 out of 100 people would have said, that was not a good call, and you saw it right away it was not a good call. And I know officials are very reluctant to call uncatchable. We don't see it a whole lot. I think we saw it in one game on Sunday. Not very much is that called because receivers are able to make such great catches. They do go up and make those. But that was obvious, Mike. he was not going to catch that ball. There was no chance to catch that ball. It was 5 yards out of bounds when it landed, maybe more. So I kind of like this idea that Irsay has thrown out there.
Can we show that again? I have 2 points to make, and let's stop it right after the first play. Roll the first play, because one of the things that wasn't ever really addressed, and I think it's highly relevant to illegal contact on the play in question, was the ball out before the contact? I never saw a split screen. I'd want to see a real-time split screen of this moment. Was the ball already out? Was the fumble already happening when that contact occurred? My gut tells me it was. Now, that's my 1 point. Let's roll this one now. Let's roll the after. Go back and let's watch this one more time, because he holds it long enough that probably Amari Cooper was hit at the goal line before the ball was out, but I'd just like to know that, because if the ball was out before the contact, there's no foul. Here's the second one. Roll this now. Go ahead. This is 1st and goal on the 8. This is the pass interference. It was uncatchable. Here's the problem with deciding whether or not a pass was catchable. And you're watching. I want to know the mechanics. I need to find this out. I can't believe I've never asked myself this question in all these years. Who's watching for whether the ball's uncatchable when they're watching for whether or not there's interference? That's two things at once, as Mr. Pfizer would say. How in the world do you know that the ball's uncatchable when you're trying to exercise your judgment as to whether or not pass interference happened? Is one of the officials watching to see whether the ball's catchable while the other one's looking for interference? That's an important point, because I think it's incredibly difficult for one person, for every person out there, to be trying to look low. Is there interference? Look high. Is it catchable? Look low. Is interference? Look high. Is it catchable? So that's a practical reality that cries out for some assistance from the booth or from 345 Park Avenue. And that leads to my point that brings all of this together. Because the NFL has to come up with a solution at some point. The NFL will come up with a solution at some point. They're either going to do it proactively or they're going to do it reactively after the big scandal that causes lawsuits, Congress, regulations, maybe prosecutions. When that scandal happens, how that scandal happens, who's involved in that scandal, we don't know. But it's coming inevitably if they don't do anything to improve the officiating function. My suggestion for years has been, Charean, to just start over, to rebuild the entire officiating function from scratch with the technologies we have today. They're still doing the stuff they did 100 years ago. And it all evolves from that point. Throw that all out. Get rid of the 10-yard sticks. Maybe take most of the officials off the field. Just have a small force out there to keep, the players separated and break up fights. But the technology is so advanced. There's so much they can do. And isn't it easier if the people who know the rules inside and out are watching from above? We hear all the time about how it's better for the offensive and defensive coordinator to be up in the booth. You can see everything. Not only can you see everything on the field, you have access to all the TV cameras, all the angles. You can officiate the game that way. You don't have to be down there among the gladiators trying to stay alive. That's the kind of thing that happens if you just say, we're going to roll the current function up in a ball and throw it away and start over. Your thoughts on that?
Well, you've talked a bunch about the Sky Judge. I am all for that. And that would be a perfect example. As you said, the official is having a hard time. He's watching the players. He's not watching the official right there, is not watching where that ball ends up. So a Sky Judge could have quickly called down and said, hey, yes, pass interference, but it was uncatchable. So overturn that. Pick up the flag. Call it uncatchable. Let's move on. And that could have been done very, very quickly with the Sky Judge. So I don't know if you need to scrap the whole thing and start over, or full-time officials or whatever. I think a Sky Judge would solve a number of their problems just having him up in the booth. As you said, it's so much easier to see things, and you have replays and all that instantaneously. Everything is right there. It's a much better view of the field and what goes on. So I am all for the Sky Judge, and I think that's where they need to start, and they need to do it rather quickly.
I think there's three things that are standing in the way of progress when it comes to dramatically improving the officiating function. I always thought it was just one. And then a few years ago, I realized what the other one is. But there's a third one that someone explained to me recently, and I'm going to go in order of one. The first one I knew of, the latest one that I figured out, and then the one that popped up a few years ago. First, they're cheap. That's a given. They don't want to spend the money. Yep. They just don't. They don't. And if you want to prove me wrong, prove me wrong. They're cheap. Second is they don't want to be bothered. Takes too much work. Takes too much effort. That's the one I've learned recently. High-level executive from one of the teams said they just don't want to deal with it. They don't want to roll up their sleeves and figure out what it would look like. What would full-time officials look like? What would fully embracing Sky Judge look like? They don't want to have the meetings. They don't want to put in the time. They don't want to stay up late and think about it. They just want to keep doing what they're doing. Row your boat gently down the stream is all they want to do. Row the boat, make the money. Row the boat, make the money. Why do we want to row it any harder? We just row it. Just coast. It's easy. The NFL should be aspiring to something higher than that. And before you get all pissy, 345 Park Avenue, this is your fault from the early 70s, NFL films, John Facenda, slow motion shots, game was on a pedestal. This 8-year-old kid that stumbled over the game 50 years ago is just trying to hold you to the standard that you created to lure me in. It's your own fault. You used this to lure me in. You created this idea that you're bigger than life and you get it right and it's America and apple pie and all that good stuff. Well, that kid's grown up now and he expects you to live up to it. So roll up your sleeves, put in the work, and figure it out. Laziness is not an option. Then finally, and this is the one I can relate to because this is the reason why I never had to cut the grass growing up, because they made me cut the grass once and I had horrible allergies. That's my official excuse. The unofficial excuse is I didn't want to do it. Back to point two. I screwed it up so badly, they never asked me to do it again. They screwed up the pass interference replay review experiment in 2019 so badly, that's what they hide behind now. We can't, unintended consequences. Look at what happened in 2019. That's justification for the laziness and the cheapness. So they're lazy and they're cheap, and they wrap it up in this idea of, unintended consequences. They just don't do anything. And that's fine. That's fine. But I really don't want to spend 3, 5, 8 months of my life covering the civil cases, the prosecutions, what Congress is doing, because that's going to happen at some point. And I hope I'm retired or dead before it does, because even though it's right in my wheelhouse, I don't want to mess on top of covering the NFL with a Tim Donaghy-style scandal that is going to come for the NFL if they don't get their shit together soon. Excuse me, but that's what I believe.
Well, Mike, there's this whole accountability thing, too, that we haven't talked about, because Irsay, by rule, is not supposed to be saying any of this, and I'm sure he will be getting a phone call, if he hasn't already, very shortly from the NFL, and probably a fine for saying what he said. So to me, if you make a mistake, it's far better for the NFL to come out and say, hey, we messed up, 2 bad calls at the end of that game, whatever. Instead, we just go on, and we all know they made a mistake, but they're not willing to admit that they made that mistake. So we never hear of these mistakes that they make, or rarely hear of these mistakes that they make. And if we do, usually whoever comes out and says it receives that fine letter and is going to get the fine, which Irsay is going to get, I would think, from speaking out about these 2 missed calls. But everybody sees that at least the last one was a missed call. You can argue the first one all you want, but the second one, it was egregious.
Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.